Undersecretary Ferdinand Jr., the Vice Chair of the Senior Officials Meeting. Sir. Undersecretary Pama will be providing a preliminary statement, which will be on the recently concluded 9th Senior Disaster Management Officials Forum, which was attended by delegations from the various 21 member economies of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm Undersecretary Alexander Pama, the Administrator of the Office of Civil Defense and Executive Director of the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Council. I'm here to report to each and everyone in my capacity as the host and co-chair of the 9th Senior Disaster Management Officials Forum for this year of the APEC, and we had the 9th SDMOF for the past 2 days. It was conducted in the Iloilo Convention Center starting yesterday, September 22, up to September 23, which is today. In fact, the reason I'm late for this afternoon is that we practically spent the whole day on the last day. And on that point, we are pleased to announce that the 9th Senior Disaster Management Officials Forum has approved, and we have gotten a consensus, the approval of the APEC DRR, or the Disaster Risk Reduction Framework, and it has been officially adopted by the Senior Disaster Management Officials Forum as the APEC strategy for building adaptive, resilient economies. This is the first framework for DRR since the APEC's establishment. For the past years, a number of declarations by the senior leaders have been made relative to disasters, and the accomplishment that we had for this year, we were able now, and it was approved by the forum, for the adoption of a formal disaster risk reduction management framework. This framework will lead to the creation of action plans that will contribute to the attainment of the Asia-Pacific region's common disaster resiliency objectives and goals. The framework promotes the mutually reinforcing interoperable pillars of disaster risk reduction, namely prevention and mitigation, preparedness, response and rehabilitation, and building back better. With the advent of the new normal, that is the frequency and strength of the different hydrometeorological hazards and other geologic hazards, the strengthening cooperation between and amongst the APEC member economies is vital in advancing the disaster risk reduction advocacies and endeavors towards achieving resiliency. We have this day succeeded in adopting the disaster risk reduction framework. With me also tonight is Undersecretary Ferdinand Jr., who is the Vice Chair of the Senior Officials Meeting, who has been with us the past few days. And we have, at this point, already adopted the framework. The annexes to the frameworks shall be a work in progress, and it is our aim that these annexes will be approved leading towards the economic leaders meeting come November. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are open for, if I may refer you to Undersecretary Qui for additional information on the 9th SDMOF.
Thank you, Alex. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Usec Pama has already given a succinct and comprehensive summary of what went on. Perhaps I would just add that what transpired today is testament to the strength of APEC as a community, because despite the differences, imagine 21 member economies coming together, trying to agree on a common framework for disaster risk reduction, approaching it from various sociocultural vantage points and from various nuances in terms of economic degree of economic advancement. So you have 21 member economies with 21 different vantage points trying to agree on something that was proposed by Team Philippines. Just 3 months ago, this seemed to be mission impossible, because since APEC was established in 1989, this is the very first time that APEC has adopted a disaster risk reduction framework. And we can proudly say that it happened under our watch, under the Philippines' second hosting, because the first time we hosted was in '96, and specifically under the leadership of Usec Alex Pama as chair of the 9th Senior Disaster Management Officials Forum. So we have great reason to celebrate. Thank you.
I just also would like to add that the efforts has not been only by the NDRRMC. This was a whole-of-nation approach. We had the complete and unequivocal support from the different disaster risk reduction management stakeholders, namely the private sector, the business and economic groups, the different civil society organizations, the academe who had been physically present in the forum, as well as the other activities of APEC. And they have, in no uncertain terms, displayed and manifested to the other member APEC APEC member economies the spirit and cohesiveness of the Filipino people insofar as disaster risk reduction is concerned. So we have manifested, again, clearly that the way we approach disaster risk reduction is on a holistic manner, systems based on the systems and on a very inclusive, very inclusive manner. So I would like to thank the Filipino people and the different stakeholders who have given us support on this. We'd like to thank also the President for the guidance, the Chairman of the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Council, Secretary Gasmin, for the clear guidance that we had in our efforts towards the managing the hosting of the 9th SDMOF. So on that point, we are now open for questions.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary Pama and Undersecretary Cui. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, kindly introduce yourself first, as well as your firm, and then we can begin with the question and answer. Yes, ma'am.
Sir, can we be given, good afternoon, good evening. Can we be given copy of the framework? Not
Yes,
yet?
we will. We definitely will. It's not yet off the presses, as if you may, but because sa ngayon ho, tumakbo na lang kami kaagad dito, and it's now being produced. And we do already have a copy of the approved framework. If I can request my team, Liza, to come up with the copy of the framework.
If I may follow up, sir, what are the specific provision or plans incorporated regarding women, children, and elderly, including disabled sector, who are sometimes, most of the time, left out in this disaster thing here? This disaster. Do you have plans, special plans for the women, the children, the elderly, and the disabled sector who are most of the time left out in the disaster relief operations or evacuation, sir?
First, I would like to qualify on the statement that most of the time they're left out. Because the system that we have right now, we give special emphasis on the people, on persons with disabilities. So I'd like to take exception on that statement because they are not.
Stand correct.
On second point, relative to the framework, there is a provision which also states the all-inclusiveness of the framework. The framework does not have a lot of specifics by the fact that it is a framework, and as I was mentioning earlier, the annexes and as well as the action plans will be works in progress because the forum was realistic enough to appreciate the fact that all these things, to include the details, cannot be done in a matter of 2 days. What is important is the passage of the framework wherein all subsequent actions, objectives will now have a basis para kung sa Tagalog nga, may pinagbabasihan tayo sa lahat ng mga magiging aksyon sa member economies so far as disaster risk reduction management is concerned.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
you.
you.
You forgot to introduce yourself.
By the way, I'm Runji Hamolo of Radyo ng Bayan, Iloilo.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Further questions? Yes, ma'am. Please.
Yung guy doon, yung isang lalaki doon kanina pa nag-release.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Mads Miraflor of Manila Bulletin. I just want to ask, in our own perspective in the Philippines, how hard it is or how easy it would be for us to adopt the framework that we have just launched right now. Thank you.
It is not hard for us because the basis or the model of what we proposed is actually based on actually what we are actually already doing right now. The system that we have right now, in particular in the context of the 4 thematic areas, which is the disaster prevention and mitigation, preparedness, response, and building back better, recovery and rehabilitation. This is not something that is an idea to us because this is already being implemented by us. So relative to your question, if it is difficult to implement, we are already implementing it. We do acknowledge that there are challenges in the implementations of this, but the fact remains that the essence of the framework is already something that's being implemented here in the Philippines.
Thank you, sir.
Si Ace yata.
Yes. We have, yes, sir.
Usec, I'm Alexis Romero of the Philippine Star. Can you give us the contentious points, the things that you initially did not agree upon and then later on threshed out? And second question is, what is this framework in for ordinary Filipinos, especially those in disaster-prone areas? Because it can be just a framework, it can just be a paper. So will this translate to APEC economies providing us assistance in the event that disasters hit the Philippines?
Okay.
You can answer the second.
On the first question on the contentious issues and with that, I would not actually call it contentious issues, but starting on the very start of the discussions and even before we came here yesterday, the draft framework has been circulated and inputs have already been forwarded before the meeting. And in essence, in the fundamentals of the framework that we proposed, there was no objection. It was only on some of the points, the finer points, that the discussions were made, and finer in a sense that mostly the wordings and the implications of certain wordings. There are a number of them, but I think they were not significant enough that these points would lead to non-approval. It's not saying that it was a walk in the park, there were a lot of discussions, and in fact, there have been consultations by some member economists while the discussions and negotiations were ongoing. But we would say these were points that were we would consider as something that would be a deal breaker. So on that point, there have been challenges, but the challenges have been overcome. And the fact that we have come to an agreement, to a consensus, because I'd like to remind the body that when we say consensus, it takes one member economy to have an objection, and it will not be passed. So it was actually a unanimous decision, if you may, in the aspect of both the spirit and intent and the wordings, because the dynamics was every paragraph was discussed, and to the point of even phrases were discussed, and the good thing was we came to consensus on those points. And on your second point, correct me if I'm wrong, you were asking is how it would directly. Again, I would go back to the statement that right now it's still a framework, but this framework will now be a guide to the eventual coming up of the different goals and objectives, or the different action plans that will be done. Insofar as directly saying siguro na anong kung member APEC economies will be, what kind of assistance will be given in terms of material assistance, I think that would be placing the cart before the horse. In fact, this is actually the essence of the framework, so as we can now more or less put into context all the cooperation that will be undertaken with the different APEC economies, and it will be in a manner that this will be done by the different APEC economies in the aspect of the volunteerism of member economies when it comes to assistance in the manner that you are asking.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Sir Alexis. More questions? The gentleman, yes, please.
Good afternoon, sirs.
Good evening.
I'm Bombo Ayan Gahete of Bombo Radio Philippines. My question is it's actually for the both of you. In 2013, when Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines, one community in Eastern Samar made a distinction after they survived the harmful, the effects of Typhoon Yolanda or Haiyan. It's because of the mangrove forest surrounding their community. Are we looking at developing more mangrove forests, especially in the coastal communities, as part of the solution, or for future defenses against typhoon, or to reduce the risk of disaster in the very near future, especially the Philippines is prone to a lot of typhoons a year?
The answer to the long question is yes. And to
Yeah.
elaborate on the answer of yes is the government right now has a program of mangrove reforestation. The Department of Environment and Natural Resources, the DNR, who leads this effort, has an ongoing project on reforestation of mangroves. And that's insofar as the specific action that's being undertaken on that. In the context of policies and that we are implementing right now, the mangrove reforestation is a significant and a critical part of the first thematic area on disaster risk reduction and management, which is the prevention and mitigation. So rest assured that both in terms of policies, both in terms of actual projects and implementation by the government, that is being undertaken.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Can I have a follow-up question? Sir, I would like to hear it from you. How updated is our disaster management in the Philippines in the aspect of rescue operations, or etc.
Can I be clarified what you mean by updated?
Like for example, how improved are we in terms of disaster management, in terms of our rescue operations, in terms of evacuations, especially during typhoons or any disaster?
Okay, first, we have to put into context the question. When you say improve, we have to have a reference from where we started. If we're going to take as a reference the year of 2010, the year of 2010 meaning that's the time the law, Republic Act 10121, or the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Act was passed until this present, a lot of improvement has undertaken. First, from the paradigm, we had a paradigm shift. From the paradigm of reacting to disasters, we are now in the paradigm of treating disaster risk reduction. Meaning to say, we are now proactive. We do not wait for disasters to happen. And the disaster management starts at the very outset on prevention and mitigation. But in the event that disasters do happen, we do not wait for disasters to happen before we react. We now have a system we call the pre-disaster risk assessment that bago pa dumating, even before the typhoon comes, a risk assessment is being undertaken. And this is a process wherein we call it's a time-bound, a hazard-specific, area-focused, and time-bound. Ibig sabihin, bago pa dumating yung bagyo, pinag-aaralan na, pinaghahandaan, para yung the aspect about rescue will, as much as possible, be minimized. Minimized in the context that the preparedness is emphasized more than the response. But in the event that the response will have to be undertaken, I am proud to say that also one part of the law, the local disaster risk reduction councils and the offices, meaning the LGUs, have improved tremendously. They have been capacitated in the context of the budgets. Not only that, we now have a system of the information and education formally being undertaken, because you cannot just do rescue operations without a common process or common protocols. We treat this collectively or holistically, I mean. Because if you just say response, ibig sabihin kahit na ba lahat ng kagamitan mo kompleto, pero kung ang doktrina, yung proseso ay mali, hindi pa rin magiging epektibo. At the end of the day, it's both the combination of the equipment and the capacity of the responders. On those points, to answer the question shortly, we have improved a lot.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, sir, and to the gentleman from Bombo Radio. Yes, sir, the gentleman at the back.
Hello, good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Reggie Adoso of ABS-CBN Iloilo po. To Usec Pama, sir. Sir, do we have a specific timeline as to how long annexes will be finished? And then will this be ready as to the leaders' meeting comes November?
Yes, one of the agreements we had earlier, but between now and
End of the month.
end of the month, the interventions on the draft annexes will have to be submitted by the member economies. And the next round would be the finalization of these draft economies. And the collective agreement earlier was we will exert best efforts that the annexes will be done before the CSOM.
For
The concluding SOM that will be so it will be submitted together with the annexes.
That will be in November, sir?
November is already the AELM.
Okay.
Kailan pa yung CSOM?
second week November.
The CSOM will be second week of November, so the target is way before that. We would be able to have the annexes already. In fact, there's already the draft annexes. Naubusan lang ng ginahul ng oras kanina. So what was important was the framework is already there's already a consensus with the framework, and the annexes will just be worked on.
Sir, finally from my end, do you have specifics as to these annexes?
Do we have what?
Specifics po for
Yeah, we do.
the annexes.
Sabi ko, meron na tayong draft nito.
Mhm.
But we cannot, in deference to the other member economies, we still reserve, we still don't want to release it in public as yet.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have the lady there at the sidelines. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I'm a Hoven of Freeman newspaper. Sir, if there will be, what are the challenges you have seen facing the implementation of the framework?
Okay.
Okay, the question will have to be answered in a broader sense. We'll have to brief you a bit on how APEC operates, because APEC has its own system. So there are 21 member economies, and as mentioned earlier, they operate on a consensus basis, non-binding, voluntary. So in APEC, it takes time for initiatives, we call them initiatives, to take root and to bear fruit. So in this particular case, since 1989 is the first ever DRR framework, and kudos to the Philippines for having proposed and shepherding it until passage. The next step, once the framework and its annexes have been approved, would be the crafting of an action plan that would then flesh out the principles and policies enunciated by the framework. So we will have to work closely with Peru, which will be hosting APEC next year, and then Vietnam, which will be hosting APEC in 2017, and help ensure that the action plan is crafted, hopefully before the end of next year. Once that action plan has been crafted, then that's the time that the initial implementation of the projects and activities and programs stipulated in the action plan can commence. So it's a long process, because remember there are 21 member economies, and everyone has to agree to everything. Just one economy saying we don't want that will stall the whole process. So you can just understand the challenge of forging consensus.
In 2 days.
And the consensus alone is
Just like what we went through the past 2 days. And it actually helped. Just wanted to emphasize this. There was an array of very good presentations by experts on DRR. And this concept of the new normal was dissected, along with its impacts on the economy, on supply chain connectivity, on food security, and many others were discussed. So, in essence, the whole Asia-Pacific community faces a common set of disaster risk and challenges. And therefore, it behooves upon the Asia-Pacific region to come up with a common approach. And so this framework is part and parcel of that common response to that common threat. And we are optimistic that the framework, along with its annexes, will be elevated to the ministers and then to the leaders, after which it goes to Peru for the crafting of the action plan. Of course, with a lot of push from the Philippines and with the other member economies. So in a nutshell, that's how APEC works. Framework, sometimes they follow it up with a roadmap, and then an action plan, and then initial implementation of projects. That actually takes time. This framework was introduced only, if I'm not mistaken, Usec Alex, only in June, right? And this was circulated to the economies twice prior to SDMOF. And it's actually such a signal accomplishment to get it adopted on the first meeting. Because normally, frameworks such as this take time. The economies take time to agree on a framework, because it tells you the parameters within which you will then operate and do things in a collaborative manner.
Thank you, sir.
I hope I addressed your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Yes, the next question.
Good evening, sir. I'm Bombo Rodgenos Banes of Bombo Radio Philippines. For Usec Pama, sir, in international coordination efforts, how can we improve aids and services to be made in a disaster-stricken country, especially within the Asia-Pacific region? And my number 2 question is, what has been done and can be done in order to achieve a zero casualty target in every disaster?
I'll take the second question first kasi pamangkot ta kaliwat karon sa unang pamangkot mo, no? On the second question, what has been done relative to the effort to achieve zero casualty? I started the explanation earlier on the system that we're doing right now, the pre-disaster risk assessment. Ibig sabihin, before the disaster happens, if just to re-emphasize it, we already study the nature of the calamity. We used certain formula to find out the impact of the hazard and determine the risks that it brings. Now, when we look at that, whereas before we are just saying signal number 1, number 2, number 3, now we go to the extent using the scientific method. We look at the impending calamities, not disasters, the impending, hazards, as we approach this as hazard-specific, area-focused, and time-bound. Ibig sabihin, hazard-specific, ano bang ugali ng hazard na to? Is it only rain, strong winds? So that's being studied. On the basis of, once we know the nature of the hazard, we now determine saan dadaan to, where's this going to hit. So we identify now the places that would have different impacts or risks. And then time-bound, how long or how short will be the effects of this calamity or this hazard would hit. On the basis of that, we now make definite preparations, meaning to say if the hazard is more of water, then the preparations needed will be addressing water. If it needs evacuation, where the evacuations will be, when the evacuations will be conducted. This is primarily to save or to prevent our people from being in the path of danger. So if there's need an evacuation, we do evacuation because evacuation is the best form of minimizing or getting zero casualty. And then after that, in the context of the response, the social welfare of the DSWD, who is the lead in that thematic area, will now determine what kind of relief items to be prepared, where these relief items will be prepositioned, and how many or how much relief items will be prepared. So on the basis of that, it's a long answer to the question, but once we know these things and once we implement these things, either we minimize the casualties or reach zero casualties. Zero casualty now is not just a phrase, it's not just a target because we have done it. And at the very least, in some of the typhoons that have passed through the country in the past few months, we have proven that the system works. And the main effort still and the main challenge still that we have is in the context of the formula that we use, which is 1 + 1, for us to achieve zero casualty. And the first one is government preparedness and capability to do it. And the other one is the people's understanding and cooperation for us to be able to achieve. One without the other, zero casualty will remain as a pipe dream. Thank you. Ano itong ikaduha mo, Mangkot? Ang una mo, Mangkot? International coordination. Okay, insofar as international coordination, we have also put a system into it. Again, using the PDRA before the typhoon comes, more or less we would have an idea what are the required assistance, if needed, by us. And in so doing, we already coordinate with those either bilateral countries or NGOs or even regional organizations. And we tell them, do not come here if you're not asking for it. Do not send us if you don't need it. On the basis of before the typhoon hits, we have an idea more or less of what we need, where we need it, when we need it, and we coordinate with them before the typhoon happens and give them a heads up. So that's basically how it is. Wain na taga basta na lang mabaton sa mga ihatag nila. Ang silingon nga kung may kinahanglan kita mahambal sa ila, bumbo ka naman, di ba? Oh. Kita mahambal sa ila kung anong kinahanglan ta, kung din ta na kinahanglan, kung saan ta kinahanglan, kung kinahanglan ta.
Thank you very much for that. I got lost. Just the same. Do we have further questions, ladies and gentlemen? Sir, yes.
Good evening, I'm Joel
evening.
Franco, Barman Iloilo. Sa malisensya, kuya mahiligay nun ko.
Oo.
Kay ang akon pamangkot will be focused diri sa Iloilo. Nabala naton nga ang OCD and SWD. Medyo often din ang pamangkot ko, sir, but I hope masabat ng pamangkot ko. Ang OCD kag ang DSWD, sila nag-verify sang benefits for the teachers, assistance from the Presidential Social Fund regarding the assistance na biktima sila sa Typhoon Yolanda. Now, ang policemen nagapamangkot, ang other government employees nagapamangkot, local government unit employees nagapamangkot, kung bala, may posibilidad man nga like the teachers, makabat naman sila sa assistance from the Presidential Social Fund nga nabiktima sila sa Typhoon Yolanda.
Okay, so malisensya ba ko? Pwede mo ko cry,
Oh, sige, sir.
Ang sitwasyon da, ang amon niya nga, sige, mga hiligay na lang ko. Makaray, amon tamon nga rulyo diya sa sistema nga dyan. Kung daya sanda, for example, mga pulis, naghambal ya Malacanang Office of the President nga included sanda sa amon nga bagay. Amon na tanang nga rulyo sa OCD, haya kwarta nga da, halin sa President Social Welfare Fund.
Yes, sir.
So, sometime a few months ago, ginhambalan kami ka PMS nga buligan sanda sa validation. So, yung ginahimo namon tamon, pagpasa ka sulat ka mga listahan ka namon, i-validate namon di Why sa rolyo namon kung mahambal kung sino tawaan, kag saan utawaan. Basta maabot ka namon, yung mga papeles, kag yung mga ngaran, kung pulis ma di kung teacher ma di i-validate namon di padara namon sa region. Kag ya region namon mabulig sa pag-validate. Hayaamon tamon nga rolyo, hindi pa ako kauyon, himon kaming stampad, pag tao ka ngaran, hambal ako, sige tao, kwartada ka mga pumuluyo mo.
Yes, sir.
So we let it go through a process. It is not for us to determine, siguro the determination if we will say that they will be given or not, kung nagwa nga tarpulano nga dayan sa listahan, paiwaywat amon ng klase katawo gali. Amo di among rolyo.
Makarayahan na kita kay taga Pasig, ikaw taga Kalinog takon. Tupaday kita.
Pareho gid
Oo.
krayata.
Pero sir, may nagkakatabo do bala nga validation subo do karon sa mga police, sa mga government employees kag sa mga maestra. Sa mga local government employees.
May dayan.
So,
Sige validation namon. Ya latest do kar o ja ginatao ka namon kag ginapangayo ka namon ya anak ka mga teachers ay duro kita na teachers.
oo.
Sa dukaro niya pagkamaan ko ang model listahan na kaptan namon niya anak ka mga maestra.
Pero makalaom bala ang mga police, public employees, basi nga may dyan man sa mabaton.
Hindi ako magtao kasala nga paglaom.
Oo.
No?
Pero may validation. Gakatabo.
Basta yaamon tamong nga papel, i-validate lang pagtao listahan ka namon.
Oo. Sige sir, durong salamat.
Salamat man.
Thank you very much. Do we have further questions, ladies and gentlemen? Yes, sir, please.
Yapon do ta. Hindi kasi it's local media is asking for the benefit of the local.
Sir, maayong gabi. Nestor Burgos from the Philippine Daily Inquirer. Sir, can you elaborate more on what the framework has achieved? Of course, this is the first since the APEC was formed in 1989. But in terms of laying down a common concept or mindset on addressing the DDR issue, what has it achieved relative to the 8 SDMO in Beijing, China? Because Secretary Gasmin mentioned that cooperation, innovations, working bodies have already been formed because there's already an understanding of the new the realities of DDR. So what has you said this was not a walk in the park and there were challenges. What were the mindsets that were resolved, or the various mindsets that were resolved, or the challenges that you mentioned? What were these? What were the opposing mindsets on DDR to prove that aside from being a first, this is a significant step for the APEC member economies?
Yeah, first, I'd like to correct the impression that there was no opposing mindset. Because I was mentioning earlier, in principle, there was buy-in. There was an initial, or at least a fundamental concurrence and agreement to that. It's more on the details, the wordings, and in any discussions and in any document that's either intergovernmental or international or inter-economic negotiations, there will always be certain points that on the basis of each and every economist's concerns or issues, if they have, if you may, that is taken into consideration. So it's more of the implications of phrases, of paragraphs, or sentences. That's where basically the challenge. But there was no issue insofar as the principles of the need for a disaster risk reduction framework. And in the difference of this, aside from this is already a framework from previous SDMOFs, was that in previous SDMOFs, there was focus on certain issues. Meaning to say, for example, one country as the host would focus, for example, on information communications and technology as it impinges on disaster risk reduction. Another country would focus, for example, on the SOPs and the agreements on how the different activities will be undertaken in response to disasters. The beauty of what we have right now, if I may use the word, is one, it is more holistic and more encompassing in the whole spectrum of disaster risk reduction, and not only in the context of either preparedness or response. So it's more holistic. The number two, it is in the context of where we are putting some sort of an umbrella idea, if you may, wherein all initiatives now will more or less be within the context of that umbrella,
Specific
so that
actions.
it won't go awry. And anybody thinking of something would just say, okay, I want this. So what happens before, with all due respect of what had been done in the previous SDMOFs, there are different initiatives, and at the end of the day, saan tayo patutungo lahat altogether? Now, that's the concept that we want. That's the effort that we put forward, which now, as we say, the rest is history. It had been accepted, and we now have an APEC DRR framework.
Yes, sir.
Complement Usec Pama's response. Just talking about the framework, the bottom line of which is to attain inclusive and disaster resilient communities. So on that bottom line, the 21 member economies had an agreement. And in order to attain that, 4 pillars, which the Philippines advanced, were adopted. Disaster prevention and mitigation, disaster preparedness, quick response, recovery and building back better, rehabilitation and building back better. So all 4 are interoperable and mutually reinforcing. Aside from those 4, the body also recognized the so-called enablers. So one of the enablers, it actually looks like this. This will be distributed to you later. And by the way, just as an important note, this diagrammatic framework was adopted in toto without any objection, without any correction. So this came from the Philippines, from NDRRMC. I'll read the enablers. Number 1 is community participation, disaster risk governance, disaster risk financing, science and technology, critical infrastructure resiliency, ecological integrity, under which the issue on mangrove reforestation lies, and of course, last but not the least, inclusiveness of women and vulnerable sectors in DRR. So all told, the whole framework serves as an integrating platform because, as explained earlier, there had already been a lot of APEC work on disaster risk reduction, but they came from so many directions, and there seemed to be no unifying context. Now, the Philippines put forward a framework that's based on a whole of society, whole of economy approach, and which integrates all that APEC had already done and everything that APEC intends to do moving forward. So that's the value of the framework. In other words, we now can claim that we, together with, of course, the 20 other members, have set the tone in multi-economy collaboration towards attaining inclusive and disaster-resilient economies. Because one consideration was that, one realization rather, was that acting together, the whole Asia-Pacific community will be more resilient than acting unilaterally on your own. Of course, we can do things on our own, but we can do more things and we can do better things acting in collaboration with the rest of APEC.
Yes, sir. Sir, Secretary Gasmin mentioned one point during his speech yesterday that one objective of pushing for a common framework is that the DDR issue or concern should be addressed at the ministerial level or at least senior high level of member economies. Is that part of the framework, or is that will still go to the action plans? And I think related to that, Senator Ligarda in his speech said there's an urgent need for the private sector to be involved in investments in disaster mitigating measures. Is that already included in the framework, or was that considered? Because I believe there were representatives from the private sector in the forum.
On the first question about the ministerial level, the elevation of the ministerial level, this was part of the discussions in the group, that this statement was that it will be elevated to the APEC leaders through the ministers. But when we say elevation, we're talking the physical document. So the physical document will be elevated. IPASA will be recommended. Was recommended kasi nagawa na eh. The framework is recommended to be passed on all the way to the APEC economic leaders through the ministers. That was the recommendation of the SDMOF. But in the context of creating another level for the venue of discussions from SDMOF to a ministerial level, we came to a consensus that it is not yet possible at this point. The main factor being a number of economists still do not have a ministerial level that is solely dedicated for a disaster risk and reduction. In fact, if truth be told, Philippines, we don't have a ministry or a department just focused on the ministerial level. But we achieved the purpose of pushing the envelope in the context of bringing to the consciousness, the higher level of consciousness relative to the disaster risk reduction on 2 points. One, we now have a document to push. And number two, there was a consensus from the SDMOF that there is a need in the process to push the document all the way to the economic leaders. I'm sorry. The point about the involvement and engagement of the private and business sector, we are happy to announce that we had a very good synergy, cooperation with the private sectors, both in terms even the socials that we've had. They've had the academe, the foundations, if I can mention, the Oscar Lopez Foundation, the Manila Observatory, the SURGE, which is a consortium of the different NGOs were represented, and the PDRF was there, the Philippine Disaster Risk, and the SM Group had representatives and other business sectors. So there was an energetic buy-in by both the public sector and the business sector in this activity. ABAC, for that matter, also was quite actively engaged in this, meaning the local representatives of ABAC. So the whole duration of the 2 days, representatives from different sectors were there.
Thank you, sir.
Okay?
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And since Undersecretary Pama and Undersecretary Cui will be attending to other bilateral meetings tonight, we would like to thank you for your participation on this press conference, and your support for the conduct of the 9th Senior Disaster Management Officials Forum. This formally
Thank you very
concludes
much.
our press briefing. Thank you.
Salamat ka.